And another thing that I wanted to get to is unresolved trauma. When I saw that, that's another thing that resonated. Because, so in the federal sentencing system is called 18 USC 3553 sentencing factors. When we get sentenced, when a judge metes out a sentence, he's supposed to take into consideration the sentencing factors. And those sentencing factors, one of the things, there's 6 different categories of sentencing factors. And one of those things that's supposed to be considered is the history and characteristics of the individual being sentenced. And I believe, as you believe, that so many crimes, if you trace the history back to it, there's going to be, let me get this right, it was, I think it said insecurity, here it is, insecurity and unresolved trauma. Can you explain that a little more? And, to the extent that you can talk about it, I think we all have trauma to some extent, but did you deal with trauma in your childhood?
I did. And it's one of those things that I didn't even realize growing up that it wasn't normal, or that it was traumatic. This is the only thing that I knew. I grew up in a chaotic household. I grew up in an unsafe place. And living like that, again, I don't know that that's different from anybody else. I do remember, when I was in school, I would go to other people's house, and sometimes it was way worse. Sometimes the dad would be beating the shit out of the mom in the middle of the kitchen. And you're like, okay, this is worse. This is not what I'm experiencing at home. This is a big, kind of hyped up version. It was I remember the cops getting called on my mom one time we were down at the beach. I remember her put my dad in the hospital. I remember these other things. But again, I just thought that was normal. I thought everybody went through that. And then every now and then I would go to a friend's house and I'd see the family and they'd all be sweet and healthy and normal. And I'd be like, man, why are they pretending to be like this? Nobody's like this. Or if they are, it's just a matter of time. But going through that, I didn't know. So I grew up kind of with a different version of the failure of imagination. I just always grew up believing there was something wrong with me. I grew up with a tremendous amount of guilt and shame for things that happened to me as a kid that ultimately I wasn't in control of. But it literally took me until it was in my 30s to recognize that as a kid, I can't be responsible for the things that happened to me. But for all those years, I thought it was my fault. I thought it was something that I did, and I didn't know how to deal with that. And even for all those years that I was in therapy in prison, because I was one of the people who immediately signed up for mental health. I was like, no, I want to go. I want to hear. What do I need to do? How do I get better? Because I didn't ever want to be back in that place. Because where I was when I got locked up, it was the most miserable I've ever been. I didn't want to live. And I didn't want to go back there. It was painful enough that I wanted to change. And for all those years in therapy, I don't know that it really helped. And I was really lucky because when I first got out, and it was about 1.5 years before I went into therapy. I was like, no, I'm good. I've been meditating. I've been doing all this stuff. I'm really on top of the world. And it took me having breakdowns out here. It took me realizing that stuff didn't go away. Just because I got out and just because I'm in the world, it hadn't gone away. I was really lucky to find an amazing therapist who has changed my life, who has helped me face some of the things that happened to me, face some of the things I experienced, face some of the kind of scars from that, and allow me to move forward. And I don't think I realized how much it had affected my life. I don't think I realized, even until my 30s, how much I doubted myself, or how much I blamed myself, or how much I didn't believe in myself. But when I look at that, and I look at all the people around me who don't have the opportunity or don't have the framework to understand that this is trauma, who just believe that there's something fundamentally wrong with them, just believe that there's something that makes them broken or different. They don't have the framework to recognize there's a way out of that. And unless we give them that framework, unless we provide that treatment and that therapy and that support, they're going to live like that for the rest of their lives. And you can't expect somebody who lives in that place, just like the kid who's never seen anybody be successful or have a business or have a home, you can't expect him to believe that that's possible. You can't expect that kid who believes he's broken to just suddenly change and be better and live his life in a different way. He's living his life with the assumption, with the understanding that he's broken and that he's no good. And I remember that feeling, and it's not a good feeling.
That's deep. When you got sentenced, who is it that sentences, do they do any type of a background of your history when they're making suggestions to the judge? The history, we're talking about, did they delve into any trauma that you might have experienced, or exactly what you're talking about in consideration of giving you your sentence?
So they do a pretrial report, which is
Right.
they talk to you about, what your life was. But again, at that point, I didn't realize that my life wasn't normal. So many of the things that were significant in my life, I didn't talk about because I thought everybody had experienced that. Everybody had done that. And there was also, when you get hurt, or when you're in a bad place because of somebody you love or because somebody you're supposed to love, you don't want to talk about that. You don't want them to take mom away. You don't want them to take dad away. You don't want them to put uncle in prison.
Right.
So it was hard to do that. It's continued to be hard to do that. So like, I didn't talk about the things that had happened to me, in some cases because I didn't feel comfortable, in some cases because I didn't really understand, and in other cases because I wanted to protect people. Like, I couldn't let something bad happen to them because, again, I still blame myself. So there are probably things that I could have said in that pretrial report that would have changed my sentence, but I wasn't in the mindset, or I wasn't in the place, and they didn't care enough to actually ask the questions or dive in deep. They were just like, cool, I got 5 minutes, let's get this done. Cool, yeah, his parents were divorced, he did this, he was in school, done.
Right, yeah. You know, I had a similar experience. What type of difference do you think it would make if those type of procedures were put into place to where there was real and significant consideration into the background of different traumas that people might have experienced when, you know, during the pre-sentencing report and pre-sentencing phase of it?
I think it would make a difference. There are two things. You know, Oprah wrote a book with this doctor called What Happened to You? And it's the idea that so often we ask ourselves, what's wrong with me or what's wrong with that person, rather than asking what happened to me or what happened to that person. And that was really the best way I could describe to shift the way we look at it. So I think it would change sentencing. I think it would change sentencing structure. And I think it would validate to that individual that, hey, like, you made choices, but your choices were based on this understanding or this experience. But the problem still is we don't have a framework to address this. So if you give this person a shorter sentence, you don't have the therapy to address their trauma. You're not giving them any more resources. You're not teaching them to cope. You're not teaching them to be better. You're just recognizing there's a problem, but not doing anything to fix it. And again, you can't expect that kid who doesn't understand it, who doesn't have any framework, to just fix it himself. Like, those people who actually deep dive and heal themselves, like, that's an amazing thing, but it's incredibly rare. So I think that we both need to recognize it and look into that and take that into consideration, then also structure incarceration around that. If we're going to lock people up, why are we locking them up to make them worse? Why are we not locking them up to make them better? Why are we not locking them up with the people who can guide them and train them and teach them and help them heal? Instead, we're locking them up in places that are even more traumatic than where they came from.